Hi guys, I was listening recently to a group of communists, Marxists, people who think with their unique American brand of Marxism, as Mark Levin aptly points out in his book. And that plug, I get no benefit from his book if you buy it, but it's a good one. Um, the concept of Marxism is really deceptive in our culture. And the reason it's so deceptive is because they define all the terms they're using for the argument. And so I'm going to point out something that you may not have seen before. Marxism and capitalism, on the face of it, from a Marxist point of view, Marxism looks superior because Marxism does not allow for God at all. You can't be religious and be a Marxist. Everything is cause and effect for a Marxist. There is no intervention of a divine power in anything that happens within the Marxist thought process. So if that's the thought process, then their idea of capitalism without God is accurate. Their criticisms of capitalism without God are accurate. It's just not real. So what happens is they come along and they begin to define, well, greed is the force of capitalism. Well, is it? In some cases, it actually is. And so they're the points that they make and the points that they want to, the things that they want to point out in our culture that depend on greed to exist and that really result in corruption and not good things. Those are true. And as a result, it's really hard to defend capitalism against Marxism. But that would be capitalism without God. And the problem with that is that capitalism actually allows for God. And God's involvement in the capitalist system changes the rules so that their arguments are no longer true. If they were true, you would have a complete chaotic world. You would have those who are capitalism completely cannibalizing themselves with no redemption. And you would have Marxism completely cannibalizing themselves on power, the greed for power, with no exceptions. And you would always have people willing to commit murder, to do all kinds of atrocities in the name of creating a just society where everybody has to agree with them. You see, there's always a power structure. There's always somebody who needs to be outside of the system in order to make the system work. And so they take themselves out. And the elites of Marxism envision an elite controlling you because you don't know what's good for you. They do. And that is so foolish. That puts themselves in the position of God. And of course, their being God does not have any of the grace involved in what God's actual involvement is in capitalism. So within capitalism, you have the ability for philanthropy. You have the ability for people to say, I have compassion. I'm going to do something against my self-interest because I can. I have the option. I have the individual power to make those decisions. Marxism, you don't have that power. You need to be subject to whatever the state dictates, and the state isn't very good at predicting what it is you need. And so that is the result. God, on the other hand, is very good at predicting what you need and knows exactly what it is and chooses to provide it in a free people. The minute the people are no longer free, they think they tie the hands of God. And God manages to get through and create a church under persecution in the most interesting ways, because in China the church is thriving, even though it's being persecuted and hurt by the government that is there. And in every way they can hurt it, they're trying to. And they've done that all around the world. They did the same thing in Russia. They did the same thing everywhere communism has been tried. Cuba, other places, Venezuela. You cannot be a Christian and not come under government persecution, imprisonment, death if possible. Extraction of all of your resources because you're obviously a waste. You don't understand the authority of government and how important it is. But the fact is this, that we have been playing with this idea because we've allowed the Marxist to define the argument. So their worldview is that Marxism without God versus capitalism without God, Marxism is superior. And there's really no answer to that question. But the fact is that capitalism without God doesn't exist, nor does Marxism without God. They just think it does. And because they think it does, it has real world consequences, and real disastrous consequences at that. Capitalism, which allows freedom to have God in the picture, allows the greatest prosperity that this world has ever seen. We've seen a system that has raised more people out of poverty than ever before. The actual prosperity of the whole planet depends on that freedom. And Marxists don't believe that because they don't believe in God. And then I hear atheists all the time, you can be a moral person without God. Well, the whole basis of a morality ever developing was that God was there in the first place. Because if God hadn't been there, and I believe that they can view and develop a moral idea without God, because God has put within them his own image. And they understand that there are some things that are absolutely right or wrong, not because there isn't a God, but because there is. So they form their ideas independent of God, thinking that they're somehow able to do that without God, but they always borrow from God in order to be able to do it. And they don't even understand that. So as long as the atheists and the Marxists define the terms, we're going to have problems. So that brings us to another issue, and that is an issue that we will discuss in another blog, and that is the issue of evolution and the denial of science, which is going to lead us into coronavirus. And we're going to see that science really isn't in control. But there's a much more malevolent being that is behind the deception that we're all in the middle of. And we're going to talk about that. I love you. We'll see you in the next video.